So a lot of this for the first half is going to be review. So let's as a group, well, where did we leave off before we went into Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon? What was going on there since it's been 6 weeks since we were discussing that? We ended with the reign of Solomon, correct? So let's go all the way back to the beginning and just retrace our steps in very broad strokes to get us to the end of the reign of Solomon. So how does the Bible start?
In the beginning.
In the beginning. Right, it's a good place to start. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God created all the plants, all the animals, a couple of people, placed them in a garden. What happened in the garden? Do we really need to go back and read this, or are you guys able to tell the story?
I think it's so elementary, we're all afraid to
I know.
Mess it up.
They disobeyed God. God gave them all this stuff they could eat. They told them not to eat off that one tree, and they ate.
And they ate. So what happened?
Satan told them that they would not die.
They wouldn't surely die.
Surely
It's amazing how peer pressure is much the same. Oh, it won't kill you
not.
to have a sip of beer or whatever. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you're not interested.
Well, it has Ellen's name on it and her last name and a couple things on it, so I didn't know if you wanted to dispose of it in a certain way.
Are you not interested?
I read it.
I'll have her give me the rundown.
Okay.
Yep.
Hold
But so after the fall, they're kicked out, and they go east of Eden. Then they have kids. Those kids have kids. Those kids have kids have kids. And God looks down on the earth and sees that there's a lot of wickedness on the earth, right? So what does God decide to do? Flood the earth. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, right? Amen? So the flood comes, the waters come down, the waters come up. All the animals are on the boat. After the flood, Noah gets off the boat. The only people who survived was Noah and his kin, which we've got Shem, Ham, and Japheth up on our big chart up there. What happened? What's the next main event that happened after the flood? I'm not talking about Noah growing a vineyard and having a party. Yep, Tower of Babel. So God told the people to go and disperse. The people did not disperse. They said, nope, we want to build a big tower. It's going to be the biggest tower. It's going to be the best tower. That's my best Trump impression. But God decides to confuse all of their languages so the people, if you don't understand what your neighbor's saying, you're not going to be able to really live or work with them. So they all scattered across the planet, and that's how we got people in China, South America, Australia, Africa, Europe, North America. Then from the flood, we jump into another genealogy, right? So that genealogy takes us down to what man? Abraham. Don't overthink my questions, guys. We're really just going 30,000 foot view here. So Abraham had a son. Isaac. Isaac had a son. Jacob. Jacob and Esau. Yep. So Jacob had how many sons? 12. So Jacob, the little brother of everybody, what was his name? Joseph. What happened to Joseph?
They sold him.
They sold him off. Where did they sell him off to? Egypt. Yep. Ended up in
I don't know.
Egyptsies.
Maybe gypsies.
So Joseph found himself in Egypt. That is very important because that's going to set up the next 3 or 4 books of the Bible after that. So Joseph found himself in Egypt. There was a famine in the land of Canaan. There was a famine in the promised land that God had already given Abraham and his descendants. So what happens is Jacob and all Jacob's sons have to go somewhere to get food, right? So they go to Egypt to get food, and they say, wow, this is a pretty nice place. It's kind of like Morrow County. We might want to put some roots down here, and they decide to stay. And then they stayed for how many years? 400? It was all fine and good when the Pharaoh knew Joseph, but eventually there was a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph, right? So then the Pharaoh started to become anxious about the success of the Jewish people, so he puts them into slavery. The Lord raises up a deliverer. Who was that deliverer that brought them out of Egypt? Moses. Yep. Moses brings them out of Egypt, and did they go directly back to Canaan land?
You got delayed a while.
Just a little while. For 40 years' time, right? So for 40 years' time, they wandered the wilderness. Did Moses take them across the Jordan River? He did not. Nope. He did not. The Lord took him up to see the promised land, but he couldn't go in because of his disobedience. So who took him into the promised land then? Joshua. And so, like I said, we're just going through the main points. I just want to get us to where we are with the reign of Solomon, because that's where everything, in a sense, goes wrong. So Joshua takes them into the land of Canaan. They are surrounded by a pagan, worldly, wicked people. And God had Joshua fulfill the commandment to go and conquer the land. Joshua did a pretty good job conquering the land. There was a couple of folks who he didn't drive out, who were going to become staples in the region for quite some time. So after Joshua, what time period comes after Joshua dies? Sing your song, Mike. You'll get there. Sing your song, your Bible, Book of the Bible song. You'll get there.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges.
There you go, Judges. So, did they have a king? Was Joshua a king? No. So after Joshua, did they have a king?
Eventually.
In the book of Judges, did they have a king?
No.
In those days, there was no king. The people did that which was right in their own eyes. The phrase that you see half a dozen times or more throughout that book. So for this period of time, and I forget how long the period of the Judges was, 370 years is sticking out in my mind, but I don't remember if that's right or not. But for this period of time, they did not have a king, and the children of Israel did what they wanted. They were an ungoverned people. So the Philistines and the other pagan folks would come up against them and would put them under subjugation. God would send a judge to deliver them. That's where we get the stories of folks like Samson, Gideon, another big name there in the book of Judges. But the people got sick and tired of living under no king. He said, well, the Egyptians, they have their king. The Philistines, they have their king. Why don't we have a king? We want a king. So they petitioned a prophet named Samuel and said, hey, we want a king. Samuel said, this is my paraphrasing of the back and forth. God doesn't want you to have a king. We don't care. We want a king. So God gave them what they wanted. And who was the king that God raised up to be the very first king over the Israelite people, the very first king over the seed of Abraham?
David.
Before David. Saul. Yep. So Saul's reign started out really good, and then it fell on its face, right? And then David comes in, he starts out really good, and then he falls on his face, and it goes really good again, then he falls on his face, and he gets back up. And David's reign was sort of this wild roller coaster. And then finally we get to Solomon. And Solomon's got this great footing underneath of him. He's got a great kingdom to build off of. David did a great job establishing the kingdom, going and conquering many lands. Solomon would go on to conquer more lands. And what else was the very important thing that Solomon did? What's Solomon known for? Probably more than anything else as an accomplishment during his reign. Builder of the temple. Right. So Solomon's reign. So we had Saul, who started out really good, then he fell on his face. And then we got David, who had his ups and downs and ups and downs. Solomon was all ups, up, and then he just fell flat on his face. And it's fascinating to watch how those three men, their sin affected them, because it affected each and every one of them differently. So we have a very long period of time. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and grab the chart. So we've got our big Bible timeline. Yeah, come here, Vanna. Yep. So we've got our big Bible timeline here that we've been roughly working around. So from the time of Adam and Eve, which we're estimating at 4004 BC, we're going all the way down to, keep going down and down and down and down, right here. That's where Saul takes over as king. So everything that we have covered has taken up roughly a third of this chart. So from the time of Saul to the end of the reign of Solomon, we go all the way from here to right here. It's pretty insignificant in the scheme of things, isn't it? So the peak of Israel as a nation happens in this little itty-bitty window. So we take 6,000 years of written history, and of that, God's chosen people had a successful kingdom for 120 years. It's just wild to think about, isn't it? And what I've realized as we've been going through this Bible study is how unimportant earthly kingdoms must be to God. His own chosen people had a successful kingdom for 120 years, and it started with a promise that was some 1,500 years before that. God must have different, bigger plans than establishing a nation here on earth. Would you guys agree with that? So let's go back to Solomon. So we've caught up to where we were, and this might end up being a pretty short Bible study, but I just want to get our feet underneath of us before we jump off, because it's about to get a little bit complicated. So how did the end of Solomon's reign go? So I remember I said he started out great. He took Israel to its largest geographic extent. There were more lands under Solomon's kingdom than Israel ever had possession of. The temple gets built. The temple is dedicated. There is a permanent dwelling place of the Lord on earth at that point in time. But what happened? What happened with Solomon?
He got real busy and wrote a bunch of songs.
He got real busy with something, with some things other than just songs and proverbs.
He kept seeing all the beautiful ladies that he couldn't do without.
He thought that there were some awful pretty ladies there in Israel and in Egypt and outside of Israel. So Solomon decided he had one wife. He wanted one of every kind now. So he went and found himself 700 wives, 300 concubines. and they led him away from the Lord. That's too many women, yes. So we look at Solomon, and I want to highlight just the depravity that Solomon showed towards the end of his reign. I know this is recapping something that we've already discussed, but I really just want to highlight it again. So we had all of these different women who served different gods. Yeah, they're mowing. Yeah, it's out there.
Okay, I didn't know if it was the flash here.
So Solomon had all these wives who served all these different gods, and he wanted to please each and every one of those wives. So what he ended up doing is he ended up building temples, building altars to false gods. Some of these false gods were very, very wicked gods. Gods who demanded things like child sacrifice. But Solomon went and broke almost every commandment of the Lord to satisfy or attempt to satisfy his fleshly desire. It's hard to overstate how bad Solomon's mistakes were. Is that fair to say?
He got him into a situation where he had to rely on a tremendous tax on the people to keep everything going.
Yes. He definitely overextended the kingdom from a financial standpoint as well. And so what God did was he told Solomon, look, because of the relationship I had with your father, I'm not going to break up the kingdom in your lifetime, but in your son's lifetime, I will break up the kingdom. And that's exactly what happened. So that is our jumping off point. I've decided to park right here for now because up until this point in time, we've been following a single story with a single people. We got ourselves all the way from Adam to Abraham. And then from Abraham, we were able to trace Abraham all the way to Solomon as one unbroken storyline that has gone from creation to Solomon and Solomon's downfall. So what's going to change now and why it's going to get more complicated is because we're going to start following different storylines. So God did, after Solomon's death, God did break up the nation of Israel. Does somebody know how many tribes were part of the northern kingdom? And how many tribes were part of the southern kingdom? 10 and 2. Yep. So the promise that was given to David, which we did highlight, was that David wasn't going to build the temple, but that David would always have a son on the throne. Even when God divided the kingdom, he kept that promise. So when we jump into the divided kingdom period, we're going to talk a lot about the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was not David's line. The northern kingdom was, there were 9 different family lines that sat on the throne in the northern kingdom before the northern kingdom got taken into captivity. There was still only one lineage that sat on the throne in the southern kingdom. That was all through the line of David. So I've got a chart here in front of me, and I might try to figure out a way to print this off and cut it up to where we can make heads or tails of it. But I was hoping to project it. But I'll just bring it around the room real quick to show everybody. So we've got this chart here. And I found this very helpful because on the right, we can see all the kings of the southern kingdom. And on the left, we see all the kings of the northern kingdom, and it gives us a little bit of an excerpt about each one of them. And it also tells us if they were a good king or a bad king. The good kings are highlighted in green, bad kings are highlighted in red. What? So that's one resource that I want to get printed off. I was messing with it. It's a very big file, so I'm trying to figure out how to cut it up. So hopefully I have that for us next week. But here's where I think that maps might be helpful for us. So do you guys have maps? And do you have a map of the divided kingdom in the back of your Bible?
Got a thing that tells all about it, but there's no map.
But no maps in the back?
I don't think.
This is a map of all 12 tribes, and in the south, and is Benjamin and Judah.
Yep. So if you have a map that defines specifically the divided kingdom,
It won't seem to.
um,
Well, it's not listed as that, no?
kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Yep. So that's how it's listed in yours. So everything in the bottom half is Judah. Everything up here is the northern kingdom. So you can peek off of his. This is how it's shown in my Bible here. We have Judah in the south, Israel in the north, and this one actually gives some of the other non-Israelite peoples around. Let's see. The kingdom years.
Yeah.
Yep. So for this map, they do the break off there.
Okay.
So everything south of that line, you see there's Bethel north of the line and Jerusalem south of the line. So you can get an idea, and I think yep.
But you got Simeon down below and Reuben over here. So really, the southern kingdom is surrounded by Israel.
Right. But that should just give you a basic understanding of the geography of the time. So beyond that, it's not just Israel in the north, Judah in the south, and the rest of the map is blank. We have other people groups who live around them. That would be the Edomites. Those sound familiar? The Moabites, the Ammonites, the Philistines, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Babylonians. All those, you've at least heard of all those people? Yep. But they're across the water, so. As we get into this, there's 4 time periods that we're going to go through between now and the rest of the Old Testament. So the first time period, cool. The first time period is the divided kingdom. That's when we have a northern Israel and a southern Israel, or northern Israel and Judah. So what happens next is the Assyrians come in and they capture all of northern Judah. So we have all that remains is Judah, and then we still have a son of David on the throne, and they are surrounded by Assyrian territories. The next step that happens is further to the east, we have the Babylonians and the Assyrians. They're going to butt heads. They're going to fight. Babylon's going to come out on top, and Babylon's going to gobble up Judah finally. So we have no Israeli nation. And that's the exile years. And then at the end of the exile, Babylon has a benevolent king who's going to let the Israelite people return back home. And that's how we're going to finish out the Old Testament. So, have I lost you guys in this conversation at all? So we got 4 time periods. So that what I want you guys to remember, and what's going to make this as simple as possible, is we have 4 time periods, and we have 4 people groups we're going to follow. Okay? So the 4 time periods are the divided kingdom, Judah alone, the Babylonian exile, and then post-exile. And we're going to assign prophets, and we're going to study the books of the prophets in light of the time period they came in. So just to give you an example, the divided kingdom, which we're going to jump into next, obviously we have Elijah and Elisha, who are talked about in 1st and 2nd Kings, although they don't have any books that they wrote, but we'll study their stories a little bit. So we'll finish out 1st Kings next week, will be my hope. And then we'll get into 2nd Kings the following week. So in the divided kingdom, the other prophets who wrote are Obadiah, Joel, Amos, Jonah, Isaiah, Micah, and Hosea. So instead of just reading one book at a time, we're going to do one time period at a time. Yeah, that makes sense. So when we're studying the divided kingdom, we'll read through the storyline, which comes in the books of Kings, and then we'll jump into the books of the prophets. So we have the historic background. And I know it's complicated and I know it's muddy. I don't know of any better way to study it, though, for us to get the continuing story. Because after this, as far as books of the Bible that are solely storylines, in the Old Testament, after 1st Kings and 2nd Kings, that's it. Then we're into the books of the prophets. And so the books of the prophets do give us some historical narrative, but they're not all historical narrative. So we're going to have to piece together the story. And then 1st and 2nd Chronicles, we're going to do at the very end, because that's a summary of the entire Old Testament that was put together by the prophet Ezra. So we'll do divided kingdom. I'll cut up this chart, and the chart's not need to know information, but it's helpful, I think, because you are going to hear the names of these kings crop up in the books of the prophets, and you're going to hear the Lamentations in the book of Lamentations and in the books of Jeremiah, weeping over the nation, and we want to be able to tie that back to specific kings and what those kings did. Because we get into guys like Ahaz and Ahab. Ahab was a bad dude. So I want to be able to tie the prophecies in with the kings, who they were written for and who they were written to. You guys aren't being very talkative tonight.
Just listening and taking it all in. Oh.
Just listening and taking it all in. All right. So I'll go ahead and give us the basic outline for the divided kingdom. The divided kingdom lasted about 206 years. And the divided kingdom really starts out with 2 men. The men who divide the kingdom are 2 guys called Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Rehoboam is the son of Solomon. Jeroboam is not a son of Solomon, so he's going to be the king in the northern tribes. And you'll find, as we go through this, the northern kingdom, they have a period of time where they cycle through kings like it's nobody's business. There's one guy, I think, who lasted a week, but he still made it on the list. So there's a lot of turmoil that goes on. But we're gonna tie in these prophets, and we're gonna make sense of it. We will eventually. So do you guys have any questions about what we've talked about for the next part of our Bible study? I'd like to get these maps printed off so we can, if we're all using the same visuals, I think that'll help us out. So just remember 4 time periods and 4 people groups. The 4 people groups are the Israelites. The main players, at least, are the Israelites. The Egyptians, they're going to crop back up. And then the Assyrians and the Babylonians. So if we can distill, there's probably a dozen different people groups mentioned. If we can just focus on those 4, I think we'll save ourselves some heartache. So the Egyptians are always going to be a threat to the south. The Egyptians were always a powerful people. And then you have the Assyrians and the Babylonians up to the north and to the east. And those 2 are going to duke it out for supremacy in that territory. But those are going to be the main enemies of Israel. I'm very excited to get to Hezekiah's reign because Hezekiah has some very great moments. And we'll read about him in the books of Kings and also in the book of Isaiah. But I figured tonight would be a good night just to try to lay the groundwork for what we're jumping into next instead of actually getting into the text. So that's really all I got for you guys. It's only 6:45. This is the shortest I've ever gone. So does anybody have any commentary on what we've studied so far or what we're going to be studying next? Tell you what, let me ask a different question. Did you ever have classes that you just couldn't get them to respond to when you were teaching, Ed?
Once in a while.
Yeah.
I remember in chemistry, one class for the whole period, I just could not get it. Now what do we do? Well, we do a little review and run over the next day, and I started to make sense of it.
And I think it'll make sense once we actually get into it. But just talking about different time periods and places and kings is kind of hard to grasp. But once we get into the story, I think it'll help.
Really start cleaning up.
But does anybody have any questions about the storyline that got us to where we're at today? Does anybody have any questions about Genesis through 1 Kings 6? Anything that you're not clear about? Anything that you've forgotten since we started this, which we've been in this for 5 months now? Already? Nothing at all? It's like pulling teeth.
This isn't a question, but it's a comment. I think it's interesting to see how these different events are linked together and, what's going on at the same time as this event and so on. It's been a good study.
Yeah, because I do feel like if we just sit in the pews on Sunday mornings, we get Bible stories in just a little snapshot. We just see the Bible through tunnel vision. So I really enjoy looking at the whole picture. I think it's been a blessing to do that with this Bible study.
You fell again. You did that so good. Shake it.
But if that's
Something I was wrestling with, it's been several months ago, you gave us a question, who was the southern kingdom? And I said, Benjamin and Judah, and he said Judah and the scribes and
the Levites.
the Levites, yeah. Where'd that come from? Well, I studied in Chronicles, and it starts in Chronicles number 2, Rehoboam, and you get Benjamin, the small tribe. But all of the the people that didn't have a land were not part of the tribes of Israel. The 12 tribes of the 12 tribes, they got divided into split 10 and 2. Well, the religious leaders were scattered throughout all that area. Well, Jeroboam realized that if the people still kept coming to Jerusalem to celebrate all these feasts that they were commanded, that's not going to work. I'm going to lose all the people. So he basically kicked the office to the priests and out and appointed his own. And they went, most of them, I'm not, and what I read, I can't sure 100% of them, but almost all of them went down and joined the Southern Kingdom because they wanted to serve the Lord.
Yep.
So he had all the tribes and affairs that are all the well-educated religious leaders. They came and joined the Southern Kingdom and had worked real good for 3 years. But in the 12th year, or the 5th year, in the 5th year, the Egyptians invaded the Southern Kingdom, partly because Rehoboam started out serving the Lord, but then he gave up on being 100% a Lord server, and he started joining, worshiping the high places and the Astor poles and all that. And so the Lord said, I'm going to send the Egyptians to basically show you what's what. And so you did have that group of people down there, but they technically were not a tribe.
They didn't have land holdings.
Because they were not descendants of Joseph or any of the other sons of Jacob.
Because when the land was getting divided up, the Levites were specifically told, hey, you're not going to get a land because you're going to act as the priest in all the lands.
And so the Levites had their scattered assignments all through it. Plus they had grazing rights to, several hundred acres. Right? You got all that extra room to raise your flocks, because your flocks are going to be for sacrifices for the Lord if they have no spots or room.
Yep. So, and it may be worthwhile as we're doing this to also just trace certain peoples, like tracing the Levites, the story of the Levites throughout all of this, the story of the Benjamites throughout all of this, because Judah does get a lot of the press in this story, but we will parse it out, and I will be the first to say, if you catch me stating something wrong, do not hesitate to correct, because it's muddy and complicated, and if I get a people group wrong or I get a storyline wrong, I am not above somebody saying, hey, you missed something, or here's a better way to put it, for sure.
I think I've already read all the Kings and most of the Chronicles, and one of the things that stood out in my mind was the Northern Kingdom had Jeroboam, and when in your chart, if it said the bad king,
Yep.
they traced his lineage clear back, and so he followed in the footsteps of Jeroboam.
So Jeroboam's going to become the standard bearer
He's a bad rap.
for, yes, he is the hypothetical limbo bar that all of the other kings are going to be measured by, and there will be kings who go lower and get more wicked than Jeroboam.
You're a kitty?
Some
But
of them you can't fathom why they became so evil why they worship all these other kings, or these other false kings.
Mm-hmm.
And
Lily.
when they were going through all the judges, the ones that did that got judged. They never learned from it.
No, they did not. So, just to recap, next week we're going to try to finish up the book of First Kings. We're going to look at Elijah and then Elisha. If you get confused, Elijah is First Kings, Elisha is Second Kings. Yeah.
And Elijah said, give me double portions. And when you read all the things that Elisha did, it makes for some good storylines.
Yes. And probably for the longest time, my favorite story in all of the Bible was Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. So we'll definitely take our time there because that's just that one's fun. I like that one. But does anybody have anything else tonight?